Okay, I'm hoping you guys can hear me now. Does that sound okay? Great. I'm so sorry about that. What a nightmare. Thank you so much for bearing with us during that brief interlude, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm streaming live from the Northcott this evening, and today we're going to be. This is a talk that was rescheduled from the summer. We're going to be talking a bit about our memories of some of the productions and projects from the Northcott's past. And this evening, we've got a really wonderful panel of people who've been connected to the theatre, and we'll be looking specifically at the impact the theatre has had on people's careers and on the ways that it's engaged with the community as well. So, as usual, I'm going to be sharing a few materials that we've digitised from the collection. But with this conversation in particular, we're inviting not just your questions, but also your memories about Northcott Productions and projects from its history. So, what were the projects which have left a really kind of long-lasting impression with you, or shows perhaps that have been really memorable? So, please do get in touch with the chat on the stream. So, if this first slide, one of the things that came up when I was discussing with the panel about memorable projects and their role in the community was the Shakespeare in the Gardens in Rougemont Gardens, which ran for over 10 years, an annual kind of taking over and moving into Exeter city centre. We've got a couple of posters here. So, A Midsummer Night's Dream was the very first Shakespeare production in the Gardens. And then As You Like It was one of the much later ones. I don't think it was the very last, but it was one of the much later ones. So it'd be great to hear if you remember particularly about these productions. We'll be talking a bit more about them and about how they really raise the profile of the theatre and of theatre in Exeter as well nationally. And so this slide also, we were looking at productions that were memorable for the panel, and one that came up was The Railway Children, and this was from 1985. This is photo here from a press call, which Mike, one of our panellists, remembers. It rained horrendously throughout the whole press call. But I think it was definitely a really memorable production in the community, very spectacular and moving. And similarly, it'd be lovely to hear if any of you remember this one. And of course, this brings us on to Panto. So one of the things that still is, very strong in kind of living memory in Exeter is the annual Christmas show at the Northcott, which has had a really long history, not just of Panto, but of all sorts of different kind of family shows at Christmas. This photograph, you'll recognise Imelda Staunton here as Cinderella. So we'll be talking a little bit about Panto, but also about the role the theatre had in people's careers, not just the very well-known, like Imelda Staunton, but also some of the unsung heroes of the theatre sector, and the role that the theatre has had in their lives and in their careers. Also looking at some of the more recent pantomime productions, Mother Goose, this was from 2002. Many of you will remember the really spectacular costumes and sets that were produced all in house, and many of these costumes are still in our costume store. So Mother Goose, the goose costume, some of you may remember from our Heritage Open Day that we had recently. We had on display, and I believe was been used by many productions since. I was just talking with Elaine Faulkner, who's our technical manager, and Mother Goose was actually the first production that she ever worked on, and she worked on it for a couple of weeks as a work placement, and it was the first production that she ever worked on at the Northcott. And so it's just really, again, kind of taps into that theme of where people's careers began and the Northcott's role in that, and then where that leads to, of course, because Elaine's now back here and leading the technical team. And this photo, I'm sorry, it's not brilliant quality. This is of the carpentry workshop, which used to be just around the corner from the theatre. And we'll be talking a lot more about the role of the technical team. Specifically, we'll be looking at the legacy of Maurice Marshal and the apprenticeship scheme that he ran over many years at the Northcott, and again the role that had in people's careers. This is a a leaflet that I found. I believe it's circa maybe 2007, the Matthew Miller story. And so I'm just wondering if there's anybody in the audience who was in the Northcott Community Company. We had some really lovely comments about this particular image on social media this week, where people remember the Matthew Miller story and the project and recognised quite a few faces in this picture. So, as I said, one of the important themes tonight is also the role that the theatre played in the community and the opportunities that it provided for performance, kind of performance opportunities for communities. And finally, we have the memory trees. So when there was the Save the Northcott campaign of 2008, one of the ways that the theatre kind of curated and collected material and in kind of in support was the creation of this memory tree. And each leaf is a little memory of audience members and their kind of recollections and what the theatre meant to them. And I just felt it was really poignant to share that tonight in terms of the power of memory. Obviously, the Save the Northcott campaign was successful, and it just, I think a big part of that was the groundswell of the community and the support. And I think that's just beautifully illustrated here by the memory tree. One of our interns has actually transcribed every single leaf on this tree. So we do have all of this, this text has now been recorded and saved. I'll just read one of them out quickly. So this one is from somebody who's in the community company. The Northcott Theatre Community Company means a lot to me. It's a place where I have found new friends, people I would otherwise never have met. I have acquired new skills in acting and singing. Mostly it's given me a confidence in myself to do things I otherwise would not have done. The city will be poorer without the theatre. So yeah, loads of the leaves on the tree kind of have that similar, in terms of the lifelong role that the theatre's had from when they, memories of their very first production. And so yeah, without much further ado, I will introduce the panel. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Janet Gale. Janet Gale is a key member of Exeter Local History Society and Exeter Memories, and she also worked at the Northcott for over 20 years. Mike Redaway was production manager at the Northcott from 1983 to 2010, overseeing all technical aspects of more than 500 productions. He now works freelance as a scenery designer, a maker, and stage manager. And we also have Penny Mendelssohn, who trained at the Central School of Speech and Drama before founding and running the first Israeli youth theatre. Penny was invited by the Northcott's first artistic director, Tony Church, to found the Exeter Northcott Youth Theatre, working with young people in Exeter. Penny went on to become a member of the Devon County Drama staff team. And she's also joined by Mikkel Brandstatter, who's her daughter, who is just in the background. There she is. So wonderful. So yeah, it'd be great to get into the discussion. And as I said, I'll be keeping an eye on the chat window as well. So please do send in your comments and your questions as they come to you, and I'll feed these in. Firstly, it'd be great to Penny to start with Penny really and talk about some of the very early years of Northcott, and particularly Penny, your memories of Tony Church and of your role and your leadership in establishing the Northcott Young Company and what that and the different things that led to. It'd be lovely if you could talk to us about that.
Yes, well, I think it was, I've been trying to work it out, but I think it was 1967. And I was living in Israel and teaching theatre, had a youth theatre, and it was all done in Hebrew with my then husband, who lived in Israel and was an Israeli. And we had both trained at the Central School and had set up eventually from the students that I had taught in schools. The ones who were interested joined us, 7 or 8 in particular, to start up a youth theatre. And it took off very well, and we were doing it every Friday night, traveling to a different part of Israel, performing on kibbutzim and so on. But the idea very much was to help these kids develop as people, not particularly as actors, though they have gone on to work in the profession one way and another, most of them. But Tony Church came out to Israel. I think he came for a poetry reading. I don't really remember, and I think it must have been 1967. And we knew him from Stratford, where we'd met him at one time. And so he came to visit us, and he came to see our youth theatre. And he said, if I get the job I've applied for and interviewed for, I want to start such a thing in Exeter at the Northcott Theatre, which is where I've applied. We then, to cut a long story short, got a phone call saying, I've got the job. They're very interested in the idea, but not for the first year because there isn't the money. But by the second year, it will be written in. And so we came over for an interview, and we eventually moved to Exeter, and we started up. And it was very interesting because Tony was very keen that this should be part of the development of the young people. And one of the people who provided my salary was the youth service, particularly the Exeter branch of the youth service. Another one who paid my salary was the Northcott Theatre themselves. And the third one was the education department. And so my name had to be, it had to be my name on as the salary, although my husband for the first year certainly worked with me almost full time. And we started off with quite a big number of students who came, and we had to be like the youth theatre. We had to be open almost every day, and we had to open on Saturday mornings even. I had little tiny children on Saturday mornings, I think. What we called the company was ENIT, Exeter Northcott Youth Theatre. And to this day, when I meet up with them or see any of the students, we always talk about ENIT. And so we were running like a youth theatre, like a classes, so it was part of the education department. And I think it was the youth service and the Exeter City Council who provided us with a whole house, which if you go up the park in Exeter and look out as you go up the slope to the parking place in the big car park, there's a little house, a little white house with a garden, and that was where we had our youth theatre. So very central, opposite, really just walk up the road to the museum. And we had a big drama studio hall there, not a performance space. The performance spaces were always elsewhere when we did plays. And mostly we did drama improvisation, know yourself, relate to other people, talk about yourself, share. And every Monday evening in particular, it was then theatre. And so we would do theatre exercises, we would take extracts from plays and work on it. Eventually we put on a production of extracts from George Bernard Shaw's plays, which was then I think on the O-level and the A-level syllabus very much. And we did extracts from 6 plays with the students that we had. And the idea really was that we would perform it at the Northcott. I think we performed a matinee with the first performance. After we had done that, we went on the next year to do The Crucible. And that was quite a big production to take on, and with a good set. And by then the Northcott were helping us with the sets and with other things. Though this only took up the Monday evenings on the whole for rehearsals, the rest of the time was kept open to all students who were interested in coming and taking part either with the technology of the theatre or helping with any other aspect that interested them. And then we did The Crucible, and I think we then performed that one evening and one matinee at the Northcott. So we were not performing at the theatre regularly, though we had the theatre's name and we were financed 1/3 by the theatre. The last one that we did was The Diary of Anne Frank. Oh, in between we did a television performance. There used to be an arts programme, which somebody will remember the name of it. It had a bottle that sort of floated past. and it was a very good arts program, I think every month. And we were asked to just to do a Monday evening um, rehearsal class. And so I ran a class one Monday evening, and it was filmed, and it was shown on this arts program on the BBC Two, I think it was. But then with the last performance, we then started going to other schools. I think we did with the Crucible as well, going to schools in Exeter to perform in their drama halls, and they had wonderful facilities. And somewhere up in North Devon, we used to go regularly. They used to sort of ring up and say, "When are you coming again?" But so we really, the idea was not really to produce actors, but to produce human beings who had an interest in something else. And the youth theatre, whenever I spoke to any of them, were always pleased that this was a place for kids who were not interested in the usual things that happened in youth theatres, but were interested in the arts, were interested in self-expression, art, history, painting, whatever it was. They found a place here. And although we lost touch through the years as I went on to do something else, about 3 years ago, Vanessa, I was going to say Redgrave, but no, Vanessa, I've forgotten her name. Oh, goodness, I can't remember. She edited The Archers for 23 years. And on Facebook, I'm not on Facebook, they got in touch, and about 15 of those then time students, we are talking 50 years ago, so 3 years ago, we met up and we had a weekend together. And I think it was a wonderful thing because everybody remembered the Northcott, remembered songs that we sang in one of the productions in the Anne Frank one. And somebody just started to strum it at the dinner we had, and everybody joined in. It was very moving. There were 15, I think, that we made contact with, some of whom were drama teachers. One was directing opera in Italy. He'd just come back to Rome from Naples, where he'd been directing opera. And there are other ones, Vanessa, who worked with the BBC for Radio 4 for years, directing plays, and absolutely was the figure of the Archers, who always came on to say, "Why did the cows always move the same?" or whatever it was that they asked, and so on. So many of them have gone on. Oh, 2 or 3 of them were still drama teachers. 2 or 3 of them were already on their pensions. So we are talking happy memories many years on, helped by the Northcott Theatre, and thank you for that.
Yeah, wonderful. That's really wonderful to hear that it's clearly been so memorable for yeah, like you said, they still everyone still remembers the songs, and it'd be really lovely maybe just to hear a bit maybe from Janet and your memory of how the youth theatre company how it your memory of it, and how yeah, was it similar in terms of that important role that it played in people's lives, not just that it was about learning theatre skills, but becoming, well-rounded people, the role that the theatre played in that.
Yes, yes, exactly that. Well-rounded people, and they are, I promise you.
Yeah, Janet, was that your kind of recollection of the youth theatre company when you were working at the theatre?
Yes, it was. There was many youngsters that came away with a lot more confidence and wanted to sort of learn a lot more. Things made more sense to them. They made new friends. It was a very, very important role, extremely important role.
Forgot to say about Andy, who was state manager.
And Penny, was there anything else you wanted to add in terms of yeah, what your role working at the theatre, and then how that developed in terms of you working in education in Devon? So in terms of the role
Are
the
you
theatre
asking
played in
me?
your career, yeah, in terms of how the role the theatre played in your career, and how your career developed from there. I understand you were involved in other work in Devon around theatre and education.
Yes, I worked on a big project called SCAR, which was the Devon team. There was a team, one from East Devon, North Devon, that they were drama advisors. They were all paid in those days by the county, I think. And I was a member of that team, as it were, for Exeter. And this was when I was already in my new job in Tiverton, but I was given by the head of my department, given Fridays off to do this SCAR, which was exploring the copper mines in Devon after the tin in Cornwall. In Devon, there were the copper mines, and we learnt about the copper mines. We went down, we crawled underground. We came out in this crystal cavern and could see how the crystals had formed. I collected rocks after that and still do to this day. But this was marvellous. We went into every single secondary school in Devon. The whole team went. We would go on a Friday and we would role play different roles, but get the kids to join in and play the roles. So they played the farmers who had to become miners almost overnight. And then they would play when there were troubles with the unions and so on. And they would, they would argue their way through the union arguments without knowing how it's actually done today. It was exciting. Before we went, we used to send out material to the geography, the history, the maths, the English departments to see how it could in some way be relevant that day with SCAR. It was a wonderful time in Devon, I think, for providing money for us to do these sort of jobs. There is a book called SCAR, which I don't have any longer. I don't know, but I haven't got it. But anyway, that was one of the things. But otherwise, I went on to do the same sort of thing, really, but through the A-level theatre studies, and eventually became a senior examiner for the AQA exam board. And so same old thing, really, all the way through. Young people developing as their own person within themselves via the drama.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I think that's. I was really struck by the image that I shared earlier with the Northcott Youth Company. The Northcott Community Company. How intergenerational it was, and how it was kind of young people and older people, and just like you say, in terms of the role that drama can play, and people developing their own identities, and how that can work across all sorts of ages. And so I just wanted to
Yes,
ask,
absolutely.
yeah, I just wanted to ask Mike at this stage. Mike, what was your memory of the community company in terms? Was it very intergenerational, and in terms of young people working with older people, and what did you see?
Yes, it was. I mean, the community company that a lot of people remember started in the early 2000s, I think it was. But prior to that, what we were describing as a community chorus in various large shows back in the 90s. And over the years, we've had a lot of children involved, usually playing young people in pantomimes. And some of those have gone on to become very well known. Alex Sharp, who was in Babes in the Wood, early 2000s. I mean, went on and won a Tony on Broadway 3 or 4 years ago. So it did work. The companies worked and sort of came up over a number of years, and then developed into the Northcott Community Company that ran in the early 2000s, and it took off and became its own thing. It started with a big production, Matthew Miller, which involved children, old people, people of all ages working together, and all gaining something from each other, which was a good thing.
Mm.
And it took off, and it became its own. A little bit like how Penny was describing when it started. It had lots of different threads running out of it. It wasn't just a group putting on a show. People were learning things. People were studying drama, and the community company developed like that. And eventually, there was a writers group, a directors group, a musical group.
Gosh,
There were lots of sort of subgroups of the community company who
really
worked
interesting.
together then to do productions. We toured shows with them. It was a great sort of bringing together of people from basically all over Devon. But to a certain extent, they became ambassadors for the Northcott. So they would be out in their own communities, in their homes, and actually doing, I mean, in very blunt terms, publicity for the theatre by being
Mm.
able to be keen on things, suggesting things. I know some of them organised bus trips from the village where they live to come and see shows. So it was the community thing was a thing that developed, and it probably started off with Penny back in the 60s. I can't remember what was happening in the 70s with it, but certainly by the 80s we were looking at the community and getting people in. But it was really the 90s and the 2000s when the community companies up and people were very interested in taking part. I mean, we were. I think the thing that took off, and we did the 24-hour Mad Show. It's just come back to me as a memory.
Yes.
24 hours, about
Yeah.
150 people, 200 people, Janet? It was something like that, wasn't it?
Yes, it was
We got, the,
massive,
we
massive.
got them all in the building at 6 o'clock on a Friday, and we did a little shop of horrors, and the production went on stage at 7 o'clock on the Saturday, and nothing existed. I mean, actually, we did cheat a bit. We had some scenery half prepared and some costumes already dragged out of the store. But that was the first one I can remember where we got people in. And I mean, I think we turned a lot of people away as far as I can remember. So people are
Yes.
interested in being involved, and their involvement can help the theatre itself.
Amazing. I'd be really interested to hear. I mean, having to turn people away for something to be so popular. I'd be interested, Janet. I mean, what was the key to that success? In terms of how, on the one hand, there were things like the Mad Show where there were people. You had 200 people turning up to be a part of it. I mean, that's the kind of participation that many theatres dream of these days. And yeah, and in terms of the community company, like Mike said, it just becoming its own thing. What was, yeah, from your perspective, what was it? What was the magic kind of formula that made that
The,
work at that time?
the magic, I think, was first of all, we had good publicity to start with. So the person who was our publicity officer really made a thing of this Mad Show happening over 24 hours, no real rehearsal, we just go into it. And they were also asking for people to drive buses to take people to and from various venues for breakfast or
Oh
just for
yes.
a quick sleep. But I think what it is if you've got two people in the same street, they bring their parents if they're the children, or the parent will bring their child, and it has a knock-on effect because they could bring 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 people, and you imagine 200 people bringing just 12 people to see the show, you soon start to fill your 333 seats as we had then.
Mm.
So it was just, I think the whole of the city became absolutely engrossed in what was happening, and they just got carried away with it. So it was tremendous success. Really was. Nobody knew what they were doing until they were doing it. That's how it was done. And from then on, people were looking and asking, "Are you going to do another one?" And I think it was a bit too pressurized to do anymore.
That's amazing. So all the theatre core staff were like, no, no, thank
Yeah,
you.
please. 2 days without
It
sleep, we
was.
can't manage anymore.
Amazing. I mean, that's quite an extreme example in terms of two days and nights with no sleep. But I think you probably had a lot of experience of shows being very similar to that, and when you're in production weeks and it being very hard on the whole
Yes.
team. I was just wondering if are there any other productions in your memory, Janet, that that particularly memorable in terms of the team at that time pulling together to make that work, and are there any productions that you can remember where you felt the team worked together particularly well and made something really special?
I think the biggest ones were what we used to do in Rougemont Gardens, because you were working against the elements there as well. you were hoping and praying that once the scaffolding was up and the fire brigade were in, that you would get the pass. If not, they could close you down before you even opened. So there was always this that had to happen, and I think every member of staff was pulled in. We had to get the security online with us. So they'd be working during the working hours, and gradually they'd be working 24 hours. So you had, all of that to make sure was working properly. Um, as far as in-house are concerned, the only one I can really remember that I got pulled into was they needed to change some of the set because it was considered not to be as safe as it could possibly be. So we had the designer in our office doing all these sort of different changes, and that again was the day before we opened. So that was a manic time. But I think each show had its own um, little issues where somebody thought maybe the measurements were done wrong in some instances, had to change it. Maybe the costume wasn't the right size or the right color. Um, and the audience would know if it wasn't the right type of costume, they would tell you. They didn't have plastic in those days, it was all leather. So even wardrobe had to be on their toes as to what was happening. Um, so it could be last minute changes like that, which drew everybody from me right the way through and up the scale would have to do something to help out. It wasn't just a one person or one office. And that's, I think, what made it good fun. That was the best thing about it, that we all worked as one big team and had a laugh whilst we did it.
That's great.
Yes, it was. It was.
No, please do. Yeah, please, Mike. Please go on.
Yeah, no, it was always a team effort, and it was a big team. When I took on as
Mm,
production manager, I think I've been working at the theatre for about 5 years, and sort of worked my way up through from being a casual crew member pushing scenery around to through stage management and then to production manager. I think we had a staff of, it was heading towards 20 production staff, four in the
mm,
wardrobe, four electricians, which included two trainees. There were usually four stage managers, sometimes three in that team. And we had two or possibly three carpenters, a sort of a metal worker, and a couple of painters who came in on a freelance basis. Plus, we brought extra staff in because we were producing big shows. We were producing 8, 9, 10 major productions a year, and then possibly a few extra ones on top of that. I mean, the when we were running studio, we ran plays in the studios at the Emmanuel Hall during the late 80s, and that
mm,
continued through the early 90s until the monies was sort of running out for doing all those extra shows. But we would be doing a lot of new plays down there, some of them for only maybe half a week. So we would squeeze two plays a week in over 3 weeks, and we get six plays into the studio. So it was busy, and we were all working flat out, hard work, long time, but it was fun, and we all enjoyed it, and it was just a great atmosphere. Particularly
mm,
in the 80s and the 90s, particularly when we were producing a lot, the money situation became to as we went into the 2000s, which sort of cut things back. We lost our in-house technical team. The carpenters were went sort of independent in the mid 80s. So they became a sort of an outside company who we still carried on working with because they always came in with the best quote on when they were asked to produce quotes for shows. And that made my job a little bit more difficult because I was now dealing with whereas I had a department who would do it for me, I was now having to do some of the work, organising the scenery more than I'd done earlier. But it was a busy time, and I don't know if there are any theatres left. I expect there must be rep theatres still running, who are still producing, you know, eight, 10 productions per year, and therefore are still using their own workshops. And it's something I've sort of, and I've been away from the Northcott and sort of that sort of theatre now for 10 years, and I've sort of lost track of what's going on in the rest of the country. And it's a shame, because when I first started, nearly every town had a rep or a theatre, something similar to the Northcott, and slowly the funding for all of those theatres has gone away, and the theatres have disappeared and become supermarkets and car parks, particularly across the south of England. I think it's
Yeah.
it's a shame. It's a change. It's a change from, back in the 50s, 40s, and 30s. There were, every town had two or three small theatres who were all very busy and being and had large audiences. And the system does change over the years. But of course, it's all when you're remembering back to the days of putting on, you'd literally get one show onto the stage. Then the 3 to 2 days later, the next one would start rehearsals. If it wasn't in rehearsal already, scenery would have to be built. And you had 3 weeks to do it and get it onto the stage again. It was it was a busy time, but as Janet said, we had fun. And in fact, one of the things about the workshop were the workshop parties. Now, if there are any old staff from those years, if they remember the workshop parties, and sort of, I have to admit, I did end up under bushes and various things, and by the end it looked like case.
Oh
That was
wow,
in
we
my
have to.
misspent youth, when
Yes,
when
wow.
fun
We
was
must please. There must
when
be somebody
fun.
watching who remembers workshop parties. I really hope so. We can share their yeah, what they can recollect from them. Would be great to hear.
Yes,
Yeah, I think you touched on interestingly there about kind of the changes now, the changes that you saw in your time. We will have a look in a minute at about careers and about Maurice Marshall. But before that, we've just had a question that I thought I put to Penny actually in the first instance, where Kelly is asking. It was really interesting to hear about the impact of open access opportunities, and obviously how that was the way that things were done. And I know that we've talked a little bit about this before, Penny, about the changes that you saw over the years, obviously by staying working in theatre and education. And just looking that through to the present day now, what do you think is important for the Northcott and other theatres to consider with community engagement? Moving now into the present day. Yeah, what would you think?
Well, for me, I mean, it's really, I've been very interested to hear the other two telling about those wonderful big productions that they had with so many people involved. I felt quite jealous. I'd like to have joined in. But I don't really think that, I think things have not changed so much with youth theatre, in that because I examined the A-level theatre studies, the same sort of idea and philosophy was that they were developing as people. Nobody was expecting a whole class of A-level theatre students, 15 of them, let's say, to go on and do anything to do with theatre. It was one of their A-levels. It was one of it, but it still is. I mean, I'm very much in touch with one of the chief examiners of the AQA, a very close friend of mine, and it is still going on. The practical work is still happening, and I just feel hopeful. I just don't think there's the public concern, the money. I don't know. I'm a very old lady now, and I feel very out of touch, and love hearing about these experiences, but I just don't know. I feel from my experience with the exam board now that things have not changed all that much. The students that I examined face to face, they could have been the students in Israel who are now in their 70s. It's 60s, perhaps 70s, coming up 70s, yes. So there we
Yeah.
are, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, Janet, it would be interesting to hear from you, and and perhaps conversations that you've had with people I know that you've stayed in contact with many people that you worked with. What do you feel is important for the Northcott now to kind of consider, with community engagement? obviously taking into consideration current contexts and how, the difficulties of the last couple of years. What do you feel like is the community need in the way, that yeah, in terms of how that might have changed from when you worked at the theatre.
I think a lot of the youngsters are the ones that are learning from coming to the theatre. Their first experience, as you know, is going to be pantomime. Now, if they don't like the pantomime for various reasons, that will stay with them for life. But it also opens up other doors. They like to look at the lighting, the costumes, the set design. So they could go on to do anything like that, or even stage management. So it's not just necessarily acting. One or two people who came as work experience have gone on to become an actor, and one is now quite a good production. I think he's now executive production manager to various different companies that put on plays and shows. So they can start off, in Exeter, they can start off with knowing nothing, come away with a small amount of knowledge, and then expanding on that knowledge and say, do you know what? I'd like to go and work in the electrics, or I'd like to go and work in costume. There's a deaf boy who's no longer a boy, he's a man who came to do work experience in the wardrobe. He now works for the National Trust, designing and copying the wardrobes that they actually display going back through periods of time. So he's gone on to have a really good career, which started at the Northcott. So theatre is important in many different ways. And I think that we should be encouraging a lot more young people. COVID is proven to be the best thing out in some ways, because it's made people realise how much they have been missing live theatre, contact with other people. So again, theatre is and has brought people together in many different forms. So long may it live, and we've just got to look after the young people who are going to be the next audience.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point there in terms of like theatre as kind of an access point to opportunity, but also inspiration, and and for young people to figure out what they might want to do, or even just like you say, to experience live theatre and togetherness, and how important that is right now.
Hmm.
And yeah, Mike, I think that brings us quite nicely to. If you could, it'd be really lovely to hear a little bit about Maurice and the apprenticeship scheme, and obviously there were, I mean, is it is there in the hundreds the Maurice Marshal alumni, and of people who have gone on to have careers in theatre, and not just in theatre, but events and a real diverse range of roles. Yeah, it'd be great to hear a bit about that, about the scheme and your experiences, of it, and the people that you saw being a part of it.
Yes, it was. It was. I think it was very much Morris's brainchild, I suppose. I'm not even sure when it started. I mean, it was already going by the time I started at the Northcott in '79, and it was already well established that the electrics department would have two trainees. They were both there for 2 years, but the 2 years overlapped. So every year, one would leave and a new one would come in. And they were formal training courses with exams at the end of them, which were done through a variety of different colleges over the years. I mean, Exeter College were involved, Bridgewater College at one point, Tiverton. It was sort of it was on a sort of day release scheme, and they would go and do their courses at least one day a week. Um, but it produced a huge number of people who went on to work in the business. Morris was also involved with a large company called Stage Electrics, which was running huge events and lighting and sound hire and advice and scenery building. And so a lot of them went on to work there initially, and then go on into the broader industry. But I mean, a lot of those trainees have ended up in a variety of jobs. I mean, some of them are managing entertainment for big businesses. Many, of course, are still working in the electric side of the theatre. They are sound designers, sound operators, lighting designers, and working all over the world. And you were saying about the numbers. I mean, I have no idea how many, but if Maurice was doing it for 20, 30, 40 years, maybe, I don't know.
40
I can't
years.
work that out in my head. But I mean, yeah, it's sort of,
40.
if you think of that, I mean, that must be at least 80 if there were two every year. I mean, it's and I mean, dear old Morris's funeral. I mean, it was incredible to look around and see all these, the age range. It was just one of those. It was great to see them all again. And of course, it was nearly all young men. Very few girls got involved with it, but it was a huge number. And then, of course, as I say, they're all over the world now. But I mean, it wasn't the Northcott wasn't just involved with Morris's scheme. That was the big sort of the formal thing at the top of our training. But we did a lot of work experience from schools. I mean, there were some years where I think we did 30. We had 30 weeks of students. In fact, it
Mm.
came to a head one year when we discovered that every department had managed to get one or two people from schools in, and it meant that trying to swap them around. What you try and do is you get like one week you'd have two based in the wardrobe, but they would spend at least half a day with electrics and Morris, and even half an hour with me. And they would go into, if they were really interested, we try and get them into rehearsals. So they'd see half a day of rehearsals and talk to stage management. They would spend time with all the different departments, so that they would get an overview of the whole theatre. When we had to say when we suddenly had 7 or 8, we thought we've got to formalise this a bit more, rather than heads of department just sort of deciding they were going to have somebody and send a note round saying we've got a couple of people next week. But it sort of, but it, we were that those were important. As Janet was saying, there are people who came in on those weeks. I mean, I can remember one or two who were definitely put off working in theatre. It wasn't what they
Yes.
thought at all, and I was delighted because I think it was, there weren't many. There's a few. I mean, I was talking to one of the mothers a few weeks ago. I said, "How's she getting on?" And I see she's now working in the business, and things are a bit difficult. But no, it serves a great thing with with on the work experience side, because there are a lot of people. And then the 80s, we had um, the youth opportunities program and the youth training scheme, which I think Private Eye showed as one boy painting a bucket and the other one scraping the paint off. Because it was always a lot of political thing about that. But we had people there working in our workshops, some with stage management, who went on to do things. I mean, it's done very well. So it's always had the Northcott was always interested in training people. Um, it wasn't just actors or indeed electricians who went on. I mean, even writers. We had Robert Sherman, who was with us as a sort of writer in residence for 2 or 3 years, wrote a few plays, and he's now writing books and very involved with Doctor Who and things like that. So a lot of people had their careers starting at the Northcott, and I think we were all always pleased to see people move on. And then there were a lot of us, and I mean, there were two of us on the screen now, who perhaps hung around a bit too long with it. But the theatre tended to draw people in, and staff stayed there for a long time. Hence, we all got on very well. It was like a family. We could fall out. I mean, heavens above. I mean, to be Maurice Marshal's line manager, which I was actually quite a difficult exercise. Morris and I had some wonderful rows. I mean, we really did about things. Quite often it was money, but he'd gone off and spent a bit too much, and had suddenly done a totting up and realised what he'd spent. But it was but we were with those falling. It's like falling out with a director. You're working towards the same thing, and it's a you're working towards getting the show onto the stage, and in my case, getting it onto the stage within its budget, which is an important thing. And so it was always there could be little battles there, but all around that it was like a family, and we would take anyone who came in, anyone who showed interest. We would lend people. I mean, giving advice. I always felt that if someone sort of phoned in to say, how do you paint a backcloth, I'd happily or put them onto the painters. And we always thought of ourselves because we were certainly because of the public funding. You felt that that was part of our remit, was to take in kids from schools on work experience, to be involved in those sort of things, to help people get into the business and hopefully give them all a stepping stone to start their careers. I'm delighted
Yeah.
to know that so many of them are still out there, and many are. I'm still in contact with many of them.
That's great. I think you touched on some really good things there that I would love to hear some of the other panelists talk about too. But before I do, there was just a couple of really interesting comments that came through on the chat. So there was Gordon Wells, who you
Hello,
know.
Gordon.
Yeah, good. Um, and yeah, he was talking about the importance of training at the Northcott, and he has said that the good news is that the Maurice Marshal Trust is still training theatre electricians today. Not at
Cool.
Northcott, but perhaps this will be possible again one day. So that's really great. And he also adds that the Chichester Festival Theatre is the nearest equivalent kind of repertory theatre in the south these days, or Bristol Old Vic. He also
Yeah, good
says so.
point.
You don't have to travel
Good.
too far into Bristol. I was like, Chichester's a bit of a trek, but Bristol's not too far to go for rep theatre. But yeah, before we move on, it would just be great to hear Penny, because I know that from when we were talking earlier that there were some people that you remember particularly in terms of careers development and people that what they went on to do from your experience of working with them. Just wondered if there was anybody notable that you could remember working with.
Well, I don't know that. I mean, I just they when I re-met with them 2 years ago, then I was hearing about people who I'd forgotten almost, but who were doing interesting things. I mean, the one who was directing, but who I forgot to say, one of the people who was the stage manager and really saw me through all the difficulties of that side of it, which I was less confident in. He went on to train. He went on to university, and then he went and became a stage manager. First, he was just an assistant down in. He ended up being the chief stage manager for both the theatres in Plymouth, and has now retired, but not very long ago. And it was wonderful to re-meet with him and just know what he'd gone through. I mean, he's now directing just sort of in his town or village, the village he lives in. I was unable to get to see a production of his, but it's wonderful to know he's gone on. And Vanessa, of course, who had 23 years, it's and with the BBC, but also 3 or 4 of the ones who came to the meeting were still teachers in school, and they were doing the A-level theatre studies that I had a lot to do with, and they were teaching it, today, all these years on. So it is exciting to hear how it goes on. I just don't feel there's so much. I don't know. I'm out of touch with it. I'm well retired, and so I'm just excited to hear all this and to hear what went on these wonderful, huge productions that the other 2 panelists have talked about. It's really very exciting, and just makes you feel you hope it'll go on, and there'll be people who will do the same sort of things, and that there'll be money behind it, because of course there needs to be money. The Northcott needs to be supported.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I've just had a comment. Someone saying that that stage manager was Andrew Hollett. Was that Hollett? Was that the?
That's right, Andy
Yes,
Hollett.
is that who you
Yes,
Yeah.
remember? Wonderful. He said he was
of
a very.
course
He
I
said he was
know
an
Andy. I
incredible
mean, for a
guy.
while he was. Yes, for a while he lodged at my house. He
Oh,
lodged
really?
in Foxham. Yes, he did. When I think he left home or something. I can't remember what the story was, but he was looking for lodging and he had a part-time job, and so he lodged with me and the two girls in
Oh, wonderful. And I've just had another comment
so
just now from
he's
Gillian Price.
oh
From someone,
yes.
Gillian Price saying
Oh,
I
what
was in
about
edit, and
that?
yeah, wonderful Penny inspired me into a career of successful drama teaching. So that's really wonderful.
Yes.
And
Oh, I
thank you for
remember.
joining
Yeah.
the event, Gillian.
Did she say that today?
Yeah, that's just come in now on the live chat. So Gillian's watching.
Oh, she's
So,
watching. Oh, I'm quite tearful. Will you give her my
oh,
love? Oh my
that's
goodness,
wonderful.
that's wonderful. Because she was not at our meeting. That is a sad thing, but there we are. That's a
Oh,
wonderful
lovely. So
connection. I
you do
was.
remember Gillian?
Oh, I
Yeah.
remember her so well. I think we met up a couple of times after as well, but she went on in her career. I went on in my family. You know.
That's
Gosh,
great.
that's it's interesting.
I just wanted
Yes, yes.
to talk to Janet now because I know that when we've talked previously, Janet, about not just the role of the theatre in the community in terms of careers development and what people want to do with their, move on with their careers and what people might be drawn into, but also the role of things like the Christmas panto or the Shakespeare in the Gardens and productions like that. What was the kind of role of those productions in city life? And working, I know that you mentioned the involvement of businesses and partnerships like that during your time. And I also just don't think we actually we didn't talk very much about how you came to be working at the Northcott. So it'd be lovely if you could talk a little bit about how you came to work at the Northcott, what your role was, and then also to talk a little bit about the role of the theatre in the community. That would be great. Sorry, that's many questions I've just thrown at you. Ooh.
Oh, I
Oh,
can't hear
Janet, I don't
Janet.
think. Yeah, we can't hear you, Janet. I don't know if you're on mute. Oh no. Okay. We'll get Alex on the case. Alex is our technical whiz behind the scenes. Yeah, Janet. Yeah, maybe
Yeah,
Janet. Yeah,
anything?
can you. Oh, yeah, we can hear you. Perfect.
Perfect. That's good. Right. It
Great.
could have been on
So
Chris.
yeah, if you could answer, that'd be great. Oh no.
Right.
So
No,
yeah,
the
in terms of, go on.
I started 1987, and I was going back out to work for full time, and I was working for an agency, and at the time the Northcott Theatre were going to put on what was it, Sherlock Holmes, wasn't it? And they needed somebody in the office to keep typing up all the script changes. And bearing in mind, we didn't have computers then, it was ordinary sit up and beg typewriters. So, it was hard work and it was slow work. Um, anyway, the 2 weeks were up and I was supposed to have gone on to do other things. And the administrator at the time came to me and said, do you fancy working here permanently? And I thought, well, I wouldn't mind this because they're a nice bunch, made you feel friendly and welcoming. So I decided, yes. So he said, right, you're going to have to take a holiday and then tell the company that you're going to work for us full time. And that way we don't have to pay a massive fee. So anyway, we got around it. And nearly 22
Oh,
years later,
goodness.
I'm still there. But I started off just doing anything and everything that needed to be done. Um, I then ended up working with Mike. He was my line manager. So when we knew we were going into the Rougemont Gardens, I used to get all the box ready for all the office papers, pens, pencils, notepads, you name it, everything. Most importantly, teas and coffees. So I was involved in doing that and getting all that sorted out. Um, and in the end, I even sorted out, along with Mike or whoever was in charge at that particular issue, the security. So you had to make sure that that was online and security men were there when they should be.
Yeah.
Um, so it was also a job that you didn't really need to be told what to do. You just knew what you had to do and you just did it. We sold tickets for outside events, other people's events. They would send you, you know, this is what we want to do. You'd send them a contract, come back signed. You'd do it up and sign the contract, send it back to them, and box office would know exactly what was happening. So it was something really that, whether it was done on purpose or not, I don't know. But every new member of staff that came in, not that there was very many, because all of us seemed to be long in the tooth, um, you just knew your job, and the managers obviously knew that you knew it, so you just got on with it. Um, and like I say, that's where I stayed for 22 years, and I was really hoping that I would actually finish up 25 years, because that's when I would have thought about retirement, and it didn't quite work. We more or less finished, I think it was in 2009, I think a lot of us, wasn't it?
Yeah.
2009, 20,
Yeah.
something like that. So I didn't quite make it, which is so sad. But we've all kept
Yeah.
in touch. One way or another, we've kept in touch, unlike
Yeah.
any other place that I've worked, you know. And we pick up conversations that we might have had 4 or 5 years ago, but you pick them up from where you left off. And the theatre manager and I used to have our own sort of language. I used to say, can you pass me the thingy? She said, what? It's on the what's it over there, Who else knew what we were talking about? So it is a very, very closed and, well, brilliant. Best job I ever had, I think. Best job. And it developed. I was someone who was very shy, wouldn't say boo to a goose. And I came away from there not bothering who I said no to, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah, I could go on forever.
No, that's great. And I just also just yeah, in terms of, so you got to see so much of what was going on, and then I guess looking, like I said, at more audiences and community and this and the wider city, and the what
Mm.
did you see in terms of those big productions that happened annually? What did they do for the city?
I I think we will start with the pantomime, because that's where all the young ones come. You've got your really tiny ones right up until they go on to main school comprehensive, or I don't know what they call the schools these days. So you had all those coming in with lots of excitement. Loads of accidents would happen as well, so people were scurrying around with buckets of sand to help clear the accidents. But they would come out of seeing something that maybe they'd never seen before, and that they just would say, it was lovely. We saw the princess, or we saw a prince. But we did hear from the actors once that, I can't remember what pantomime it was. Mike probably might remember, but the prince was just about to kiss the princess. They got very, very close, and two of the older children said, "Oh, go on and kiss her. Don't keep wasting time." So the reaction again was really funny. So you knew they were obviously watching that. Um, then you'd see them a few years later come in to see a grown-up show. You'd suddenly realize that these children have grown up. So they must have enjoyed their first um, sort of first time they'd ever been into a theatre. Um, we used to get, sometimes some people would say, we don't come to the theatre that often because we've got to dress up. And I did say to him, you don't have to dress up. You can come in shorts and t-shirts, kick your shoes off, make yourself comfortable. That's what you're supposed to do. Um, then you got into the field, i.e., all the Shakespeare. Um, Exeter City Council were really good. They used to help us an awful lot financially as well as ordinary help. Um, Again, they would advertise us as part of the start of the festivals that would come through after August. Um, that was a big thing because people came from Somerset. They would come down halfway through Cornwall. They would come up. So our audience was very diverse, very wide. And again, it was this sort of expectation. You could feel like the air sometimes would be crackling. They'd bring their picnic baskets. They'd have their bottle of champagne. They'd sit on the blankets before they were called into the auditorium. It did bring in a lot of people into Exeter, so it really had financial benefit. To what tune, I don't know, but knowing some of the executives on the city council, they did say that once the Shakespeare finished, it just wasn't the same again. There just wasn't the cash flow coming through, um, and it was a real shame, real shame. But I
Thank
think
you.
people expected it each time, each year they wanted this Shakespeare, and when it just didn't happen any longer, people were quite upset, couldn't really realize why.
It definitely is still something that people remember locally. I mean, it is definitely still part of the public kind of memory and imagination. Was
Yes,
those big shows, and people do they yeah. There was a bit of a benchmark there, I think, in terms of what outdoor theatre was or could be, and
yeah.
I think it was yeah. Ooh, looks like Mikhail is trying to say something. I
I
don't know if
can't do
they're.
chat, but I
Hi
was
there.
just wondering why did the Shakespeare stop?
Money.
Yeah.
Money.
It
Yeah.
was it was
Because money
funding.
and the company went into administration.
Yeah,
I mean, they had decided to not do it for. I think we did one in 2009,
that's right.
and then 2010 the administration came in, but the decision had been made in 2009 not to do one in 2010 because it was costing so much. As Janet said, it started off. I mean, something in simple terms. It started off. We started off having one security man hired in from a security company. He came on at 6 o'clock in the evening. He went at 8 o'clock the following morning. Within about 5 or 6 years, we had one man doing 24 hours, or we had 24 hours coverage, and we had to have two people on during the performances because of problems we were with other people outside of the site.
Yes.
So it was sort of it became much more expensive as it went along, and it sort of grew and grew and grew. At the end, the last performance tried to simplify it by not having the huge auditorium built, and we put the audience on the flat. Um, that that suffered because it was a very very wet summer, so it got very muddy, and it was the site. Everyone was thinking, well, perhaps the auditorium was a good idea because at least it
Mm.
kept people dry. It's no, it was a. I have memories of it. Um, it was me
Yeah.
who sort of was on the site organising it all and having to keep it all under control. I mean, I loved it to be at times. I mean, it was sort of being the man in charge, being the one that everybody pointed at when someone said who do I talk to about whatever. I have to admit now, having been away from it for 10 years, I'm delighted not to be in that position anymore. But Rougemont, it was a big project, huge project, and
Mm.
because you weren't just putting on a show, you were building a theatre to put the show in as such, and of course, very very large sets. We had a big open, big space, and some of those sets were much much bigger than anything we would build for the actual Northcott itself, because we didn't have the space in the Northcott for it. But down there, we would build sort of huge things. So it was a hard working thing for everybody, actors included. I mean, it was, it could take a couple of minutes to get from one end of the site to the other. So it was
Mm.
whereas in the Northcott, you'd be half a minute to get from the front of the stage to the sort of where the tools were kept. So, but it was a shame it went because it did do the theatre a lot of good, I think, and Exeter itself. It was something that it became a prestige
It
event,
did.
and it was looked at like a lot of there are other events, similar events around the country. But no, and it was a shame that it disappeared rather rapidly. Shame.
Yeah, thank you. So we're coming towards the end of our time, believe it or not. So
Good
this is kind
heavens!
of when we kind of come into a bit of a Q&A. And so yeah, for people at home, this is your opportunity now. If you have that burning question for the panel, then please send it in now. There are a couple that have kind of come in, and then that we can talk about. And in the meantime, please do send them in. So we've had one from Harold Lake. Saying hello, hi all. Northcott used to link with us at North Taunton Ants, and so I think that's actors North Taunton, like North Taunton Acting Society Ants, and borrowed gear and did workshops, and yeah, and he wanted to know if someone could talk a bit about the trips to the Minack in Cornwall. Um, yeah, I don't know who remember. Yeah, I don't know. Janet, do
Oh
you
yes,
remember? Or yeah, either. You please jump in terms of
yeah,
the trips to Minack.
yeah. Good evening, Twiggy. Uh,
Yes, it is
Mr.
Twiggy.
Lake,
I
I
know I wondered
remember.
if Harold Lake. I was like, I'm just making sure that's Twiggy. I spoke to earlier this year. Hi,
Yes,
Twiggy.
yeah, yeah. It's yeah. We go back a very long way. I think we were at school together, sort of many decades ago. But yes, I mean, certainly working with. I mean, when I got back in contact with Twiggy and Ants in North Taunton and various, I mean, a lot of groups around the country. I was saying earlier that we saw helping companies like that as part of our remit. It was something we could do. We had a huge shed full of scenery and props, which people would hire. We didn't charge huge hire fees. We charged enough money to cover the cost of staff dealing with the things going in and out. It was something which we tried to do as much as we could. I always had a sort of a little fantasy thought that any show going on in Devon should have a little thank you to the Northcott somewhere in their programme. And it might only be a bit of advice, but I'd ask that people would give us a little credit somewhere just to show that we did work with people. Indeed, when the Arts Council crisis happened, a lot of those companies did step forward and say, "Well, we
Mm.
would miss the Northcott because twice a year we borrow a couple of chairs and some props." So we were trying to sort of work with people like that. And the trips to the Minack, I mean, the Northcott used to tour to the Minack I think it was through the 70s. They used to do a lot of touring to the Minack, which then stopped by the time I arrived in '79. But we did take one show in my time, and I can't remember the title of it. I've still got lots of photographs, and that'll be the one that Twiggy can remember because of the. I can't. The title will not come back to me. I know it had something to do with a wolf, and well, I think it did. And we did it in Rougemont Gardens, and we did it for a week at the Minack, and it's not the easiest of places to get into. It's anyone who knows it knows it's basically built down a cliff. So you arrive, and then everything has to go down the cliff, and
Mm.
and if it's sort of big, most things in theatre arrive out of the back of a lorry in sort of large wooden boxes with wheels, and they then have to be sort of carried and bounced down steps. But once you get onto that stage, it's absolutely idyllic. And back in those days, I was a smoker, and I remember saying to someone, "Well, is there a smoking area backstage?" And we were in this little tiny courtyard. There's like a little modern block of dressing rooms hidden away round the corner, and there's a little courtyard off the side of it with a wall, a very rather ancient-looking wall with a door in it. I mean, the smoking area is out through there. So when it came to the time I was desperately in need of a cigarette, opened the door, and there was the just most wonderful view of, I think it's Porthcurno Beach, this arc of sand going around with the blue turquoise sea. And I mean, it was, so I made sure everybody else knew, and most of the non-smokers used to go out for smoke breaks as well because the view was just so spectacular. So the Minack was certainly a great fun thing to do. I advise anyone to go and see it.
Yeah, that's great. And I
I
think it
did.
was really. Oh,
Yeah.
Penny, please.
Yeah. I was just remembering actually that the first thing I did in the first week, my husband and I were told we had to take the students down to the Minack. And we didn't know we didn't know where it was. We didn't know Exeter. We didn't know Devon, but the driver knew where he was going. And somehow we took the students, and that we got through some of the students that way. By there was a bus organised. I don't know if any of you organised it, but we went. The first thing we did, almost the first evening that we took the job on, was to go down to the Minack. And you're quite right, that amazing view. And that's kind of backstage, almost into the water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. And then I think you also touched on, I just wanted to mention the role that the theatre plays in just like, what Twiggy was saying in terms of borrowing gear, the role of the theatre and just like the whole ecology of theatre in in the outlying region, and that's often not really spoken about. It's often because it is often just like it'll be just a conversation with a person, and it doesn't often get put in the Arts Council report, like, well, we're actually also supporting all of these small theatre companies and people in this way. It's often really overlooked, all those informal connections between theatre companies where they'll be borrowing costume, and it happens all the time, but it's just the little extra bits that the theatre team just do anyway because they want to help, and play such an important part. So it's really nice, really happy that Twiggy was able to get in touch with that. We've just got time for one more question, I think. And so, there's this one from Kelly. So just kind of leading on from the Rougemont productions, and it feels like they had a big impact on how people felt about the city. To Penny, it would be great just to hear, do you have any other memories or thoughts on how theatres shape people's feelings about a city or a region? So, basically the role in how people feel about where they live.
I don't know, really. I mean, I hope theatre continues. It just seems to become more difficult because, just as Mike was saying, so expensive. And, the business that there might be trouble from outside just wasn't like that back in the late 60s. People were just more naive in a way, just excited that the Northcott was. And yes, I mean, I took my two small children who were 5 and 7 the day we arrived to the Northcott, where they were doing Midsummer Night's Dream. And Tony was not only the director, but he was playing in it. He was playing Theseus. And they sat in the front row, and I think they've never forgotten it. They became sort of interested in theatre.
That's me. And I was a drama teacher. I was a drama teacher for most of my career too.
So it got in the blood. The first night in Britain. I mean, we were living with Tony Church for the first week or two till we found a house. So we were living with his family. Yes. Gosh, I'd forgotten that.
That's great.
So happy memories, and it seems all sort of simpler. I don't know. That's just a long view.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to remember, because I think, Kelly's question, it was about how theatre shapes people's feelings about where they live now, but also how that was in the 60s. And from reading a lot of the material in the archive about when the theatre opened, you're right, there was such a lot of local excitement and pride in the theatre opening, because obviously at the time it was this flash, modern new building that had been built, purpose built as as a theatre for Devon, and that was, it was a very exciting time for people living in Exeter to have it.
Yeah.
And I think it's
I
really
remember how
important.
impressed we were coming from Israel that we had the Habima Theatre in Israel, which was a bigger theatre. But I mean, this was new, and it was, it was just starting up. And it was very exciting. When we came for our interview, we just, couldn't wait to get organised, find somewhere to live, and move from Israel. So, yes, I mean, it was exciting.
Yeah, wonderful.
Long time ago.
So it would be really lovely now, if there aren't any other burning questions coming in from viewers at home, then yeah, it would be great just to kind of go around the panel and just have kind of I like to call kind of closing comments, really. And I think if it's just something that you feel that you've been particularly struck by from the conversation today, or if there's anything that you wanted to mention but hasn't come up, but you feel is important to share. Yeah, it's just kind of your last speak now kind of moment of the evening. So if I go round, I'll pick on Janet first, if that's all right. Just if you just like I said, anything along the lines of things that have come up for you this evening.
I think what's come through from everybody is how much they enjoy theatre, and their enjoyment, their excitement about it is actually passed that on to the people they've also been either tutoring or helping, going into schools, talking to school children, especially the GCSE ones that are coming up for a GCSE, or making their decisions as to what they might like to do. And I think I don't think theatre will ever die. It'll change, because there'll be new people coming in with different ideas, but it will never die, and it can't ever die. It's more important to have theatre educators in schools, for schools to be teaching young children about theatre and giving them that confidence that they need, which they'll only ever get if they have to talk in public. They don't do debating societies in schools anymore, so where else are they going to get this speaking in public from? So they're important, extremely important in education for everybody.
I think that both the O and the A level theatre studies has contributed a lot. That had a lot to do with the person and the meaning of the exam meeting of the teachers. I mean, I used to run teachers' meetings and so on, examiners' meetings, teachers who were going to be helping with marking the scripts. And this was very exciting, but it made you feel how wide it was, really. I mean, it's a successful A-level exam, which has a lot of different aspects to it. And it was impressive, the number of drama teachers who were there. I mean, I can remember standing in the queue for lunch. There was one of the ones from the Northcott that I didn't know that now he'd become an examiner as well. I knew that several of them had become drama teachers because they'd gone to university, which began, of course, having theatre and drama, which hadn't been there in my day, really. You went to drama school, you couldn't go to ordinary university and do a degree in drama at that time very easily, I don't think at all. So I think it's, all these different aspects have made it still important. I feel quite excited to hear the other two panelists telling about what went on. These huge, great productions. It sounds so exciting. Yeah, it's been impressive to listen about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Penny.
Yes, and thank you, Penny. I was very interested to hear Penny's sort of her story of coming into the theatre, because it was 10 years before I first appeared at the Northcott. But what I think what we've all been talking about is how theatre has an effect on people that they remember for a long time. I mean, the title that theatre creates memories. It's something I've always considered over the years. And you mentioned the photograph of the railway children when we did the photo shoot in Paynton. Um, that show that kept coming back to me for at least 15 years when I was giving talks to schools, and older children would suddenly say, where did the train come from in the tunnel? And I'd go, but you're too young to have seen that. It was 10 years ago. And in fact, my last inquiry about the railway children was 3 months ago, when somebody
Oh,
I'd worked with. She only phoned up to double check when the year was, because she'd worked at the theatre as a stage manager for many years and saw it when she was a child, and remembers it. And it had come up in a conversation. They couldn't remember which year. So people do remember, and we are creating memories for the audience and for the people involved in the shows, because we all have those memories. Some of them aren't particularly happy, maybe sometimes, but it's a it's what the business is all about, and I'm delighted to still be in it. And now I do work with stage schools and Exeter College, and so I'm still working with young people and encouraging them in theatre.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. It's really lovely. There's been a real nice thread throughout about young people, and yeah, the importance of the next generation and inspiring them, which is really great because we're coming up to Christmas now, and so there are going to be lots of opportunities where young people are going to be able to, it is often at Christmas that people go and see a show, and there are going to be Christmas shows here at the Northcott, and I know there are lots others happening across the city as well. So it feels like, yeah, really nice that that's been on our minds
Oh
this
yes,
evening.
yes. I must just butt in.
Yeah.
I'm currently working on Beauty and the Beast, which is performing at the Exeter Corn Exchange from the 11th of December to the 3rd of January. There, got you, Northcott.
Got the plug in.
I don't
Nicely
see us as
done.
competition. It's not a competition. We're all, because we'll all get a good audience and they'll all hopefully enjoy their Christmas show. Sorry to butt in, Sophie, but I thought I'd get the
No, I'm
advert
really
in.
happy you did. It's really nice. I've been seeing all the Christmas shows popping up. I've been having a look this week about what I'm going to take the kids to. So yeah, it's great. Thank you so much. But yeah, so wonderful. I mean, just want to say thank you to our panel. Also, a huge thank you to Rachel and Trish, who have been our BSL interpreters for the evening. Thank you guys. Yeah, really fantastic. And thank you to you, the audience. Really wonderful questions and comments coming in. Yeah, please do keep in contact as we're going to do. We've got one more heritage discussion left this year, which will be in about a month's time, which is going to be a very future-facing one, imagining what we want to come next. And but for now, again, thank you. Thanks again for everybody. Really generous and sharing of memories and thoughts. And so I think it's been a really wonderful discussion. So yeah, I'll just sign off and thank you all for coming.